Welcome to our deep dive. Today we're looking into the Melian Dialogue as recorded by the ancient Greek historian Thucydides.
Okay.
It's 416 BCE,
Right.
right in the middle of the Peloponnesian War.
Right.
And we've got two sources to help us understand this.
Okay.
An article from thecollector.com
Right.
and a briefing document called the Melian Dialogue, Power, Morality, and the Thucydides Trap.
Yeah.
So the Melian Dialogue,
Mm-hmm.
this isn't just some old dusty historical thing.
Yeah.
It tackles a question that still haunts us today.
Right.
Might make right.
Yeah.
And as we're going to find out,
Mm-hmm.
the answer to that has some pretty unsettling implications for how we understand power dynamics, even in today's world.
Yeah. So to really get the Melian Dialogue,
Mhm.
we need to first understand the context of the Peloponnesian War.
Okay.
This wasn't just some little border fight. It was brutal.
Oh,
It
wow.
went on for decades.
Okay.
It was a struggle for supremacy in the ancient Greek world. And as thecollector.com details,
Mhm.
this clash pitted Athens,
Yeah.
a naval superpower, against Sparta,
Okay.
a really formidable land-based military force.
Interesting.
So this war basically split the Greek world in two.
Oh, wow.
It pulled in allies. It covered a huge geographical area from Sicily in the west
Okay.
to Byzantium in the northeast.
Ah.
And it's worth noting that even the Persian Empire jumped in.
The Persian Empire.
Yeah, they saw a chance to weaken the Greeks and ended up backing Sparta. So
Wow.
that added another layer to an already chaotic situation.
So we've got these two titans clashing,
Yeah.
Athens and Sparta,
Right,
and then the Persian Empire throws their weight behind Sparta.
right.
Sounds like a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
But where does Melos fit into all this?
So Melos was a small island state
Right.
in the Aegean Sea,
Hmm.
neutral.
Okay.
They had ancestral ties to Sparta.
Okay.
They wanted to stay neutral, but their location and their Spartan connection made them a target for the Athenians.
A target.
Yeah, they were caught between a rock and a hard place.
Wow.
They were facing the full might of Athens with very few options.
And that's where the Athenian ultimatum comes in.
Exactly.
They basically gave Melos a choice: submit and pay tribute or face destruction.
Exactly. The Athenians, confident in their military, they saw no need for diplomacy or compromise.
Why?
They demanded total surrender from Melos
Okay.
and promised a very grim outcome if they resisted.
So what did the Melians do faced with this huge threat?
Yeah.
Did they give in to Athenian pressure?
They chose to resist.
Really?
Yeah, it was a huge gamble,
Yeah.
but they believed they had a moral and a strategic reason to fight back.
Okay.
And this is where Thucydides gives us the Melian Dialogue.
The Melian Dialogue.
It's a detailed account of these negotiations between Athenian envoys and the leaders of Melos.
Okay. Sounds like we're about to hear a high-stakes diplomatic showdown.
Yeah.
What were the main points made by both sides?
So the Melians, they were clinging to hope.
Okay.
They used a bunch of different arguments.
Right.
They believed in a natural order
Mm-hmm.
where justice and righteousness should win. This is something that thecollector.com really highlights.
Right.
They said that just men,
Mm-hmm.
even if they're weaker,
Yeah.
deserve protection,
Mm-hmm.
and that Athenian aggression was going against this basic principle.
That's a strong argument.
Yeah.
Did they also bring up their Spartan heritage
They
to try and deter the Athenians?
Yeah. Thecollector.com points out that they reminded Athens of their shared Dorian heritage,
Okay.
hoping to trigger some sense of kinship,
Okay.
or at least caution.
Right.
And both sources also point out
Mhm.
that the Melians believed the gods would be on their side,
Okay.
citing their righteousness and the injustice of Athens' position.
Wow.
They thought divine intervention could tip things in their favor,
Right.
even though they were clearly outmatched militarily.
Okay. So they appealed to justice,
Right?
kinship,
Mm.
even divine favor,
Yeah.
trying to sway the Athenians.
Mm-hmm.
How did the Athenian envoys respond to all this?
The Athenian response is fascinating
Okay.
and chilling.
Okay.
They basically took apart all the Melian arguments,
Wow.
revealing a worldview
Mm-hmm.
based on just raw power
Okay.
with zero moral considerations.
Wow.
They dismissed any idea of justice
Yeah.
as totally irrelevant between powers that are unequal,
Right.
saying strength determines what's right in the chaotic world of international relations.
That's pretty ruthless.
It is.
Did they offer any justification at all for this stance?
Well, they said it was just the natural order of things.
Natural, yeah. They argued that self-preservation and the pursuit of power, that's just human nature.
Right. And any state in their position would do the same.
Wow.
In fact, they specifically said the strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must.
Wow, that's a powerful phrase.
It is.
It's a very disturbing phrase.
Yeah.
It strips away all pretense of morality or ethics and boils international relations down to this brutal contest of power.
Yeah.
Did the Melians try to counter that bleak assessment?
They did, but their responses get more and more desperate as the dialogue goes on.
Okay.
They argued that Athens's actions would create fear and distrust,
Right.
which would eventually lead to their downfall.
Okay.
They also still hoped that Sparta would come to their aid because they were afraid of the precedent
Right.
set by Athens attacking a neutral, although somewhat related state.
Okay. So the Melians tried to reason with the Athenians,
Yeah.
appealing to both their logic and self-interest. It sounds like a classic case of a weaker power
Right.
trying to use diplomacy and moral arguments to stand up to a more powerful aggressor.
Right.
Did these pleas work?
Did they have any impact on the Athenians? No, they didn't. The Athenians were completely unmoved.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
They thought the Melian arguments were naive and ultimately just didn't matter.
Wow.
They had the power to do what they wanted,
Right.
and they didn't see any reason to compromise.
Wow.
Their decision, though, reveals a key part of real politic that goes beyond just brute force.
Okay, so we've talked about the strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must.
Right.
But you're saying there's more to it than that?
Exactly. The Athenians, they weren't just showing off their military power. They were using a very clever kind of psychological warfare
Okay.
by showing their absolute resolve
Right.
and willingness to use force. They were trying to scare other states into submission.
Ah, I see.
Yeah. The siege and destruction of Melos
Right.
sent a chilling message to the rest of the Greek world.
Which was,
Defy Athens, and this is what will happen to you.
it's a calculated show of force.
Right.
Not just for Melos, but for anyone thinking of challenging Athenian power.
Right.
And tragically, it worked. The Melians, despite their efforts, were crushed by the Athenian war machine.
Yes. The Athenian siege was brutal. It went on and on, ended with the Melian men being executed
Wow.
and the women and children being enslaved.
That's awful.
Yeah, the Collector.com is very clear about how brutal the outcome was.
Yeah.
It really stresses the horrible consequences
Right.
of Athenian realpolitik in action.
So it's a stark reminder that power,
Yeah.
unchecked by any moral boundaries,
Right.
can lead to some really awful things.
Yeah.
But beyond the immediate tragedy, what broader lessons can we take from the Melian Dialogue?
Right.
It seems like a warning about the dangers of ambition without limits
Yeah.
and how fragile justice is in a world ruled by power politics.
That's definitely one way to see it. But I think the Melian Dialogue has even deeper insights,
Okay.
especially when we think about the Thucydides Trap.
Okay, let's talk about that. Our briefing document mentions it,
Right.
but honestly, it's one of those terms I hear a lot,
Yeah.
but don't fully understand.
It's actually a pretty simple idea,
Okay.
but it has huge implications.
Okay.
It was coined by Harvard professor Graham Allison. The Thucydides Trap describes this dangerous situation
Okay.
that happens when a rising power threatens to replace an existing one.
Mm-hmm.
This threat
Right.
creates fear, insecurity, and a scramble for dominance
Right.
that often ends in war.
So it's not just about one power being stronger.
Right.
It's about the anxieties
Yeah.
and miscalculations
Right.
when the established order's challenged.
Exactly.
So I'm guessing the Peloponnesian War fits this pattern.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thucydides himself, writing centuries ago, saw this dynamic.
Okay.
Athens, with its growing navy and its imperial ambitions.
Was a direct challenge to Spartan hegemony.
Hegemony.
And by hegemony, I mean
Yeah.
the dominance or leadership of one state over others.
Got it.
So Sparta, worried about losing its power and influence, felt it had to respond. And that led to the decades-long conflict
Right.
that engulfed the Greek world.
So the Melian Dialogue becomes a small-scale version of this bigger power struggle.
Exactly.
Okay.
Melos, caught between these two titans, shows what happens when the Thucydides trap is sprung.
Wow.
Melos becomes collateral damage
Right.
in this bigger game.
Right.
A reminder that smaller states often suffer the most when big powers fight.
Yeah.
But this applies to more than just ancient Greece.
Okay.
Allison's research found many examples of the Thucydides trap in history,
Okay.
and the pattern's worryingly consistent.
So you're saying this dynamic is unavoidable, that history's bound to repeat itself. That's a pretty grim outlook.
Not necessarily.
History can give us valuable lessons and warnings,
Right.
but it doesn't control the future.
Okay.
We have choices.
Right.
We can learn from the past and do things differently.
Right.
The key is to see the patterns, understand why things happen,
Right.
and find ways to lessen the risks.
So awareness is the first step to avoiding the trap.
Right.
But in a world where power often beats diplomacy,
Yeah.
how can we actually change things?
Right.
The Melian Dialogue doesn't exactly give us a plan for peaceful solutions.
It doesn't, but it does highlight the dangers of miscalculation and the importance of clear communication.
Okay.
The Athenians, maybe blinded by their own power,
Yeah.
failed to really grasp how anxious Sparta was or how determined the Melians were.
Okay.
They underestimated the potential fallout from their actions,
Right.
thinking that force alone would get them what they wanted.
And that miscalculation was fatal.
Yeah.
Not just for Melos,
Right.
but for Athens in the end.
Right.
They won the battle but lost the war.
That's the irony of the Thucydides trap. It often leads to self-destruction, even for the supposedly stronger power.
Right.
The cost of conflict in lives and resources can be way higher than any perceived benefit.
So what does this mean for us now?
Yeah.
Are there modern examples
Yeah.
of the Thucydides trap playing out?
There are, and maybe the most worrying one is the relationship between the U.S. and China.
Yeah, the elephant in the room.
Right.
China's economic and military rise has definitely been changing things on the world stage.
Right.
I've heard people comparing this to the Peloponnesian War,
Mm-hmm.
but I've always been a bit skeptical.
Yeah.
Are those comparisons really valid?
I think they are worth taking seriously.
Okay.
The parallels are striking.
Like-
We've got a rising power, China, with
Yeah.
a growing economy and military,
Yeah.
challenging the dominance of the U.S.
Okay.
And as China asserts itself, we're seeing more friction points.
Like what?
Trade disputes, territorial claims in the South China Sea,
Right.
a growing rivalry in technology.
It does sound eerily familiar.
Yeah.
But isn't it oversimplifying things
Mhm.
to just put the Athenian-Spartan dynamic onto the U.S.-China relationship?
Yeah.
Surely there are important differences.
Of course, historical analogies are never perfect.
Right.
We're not dealing with city-states fighting over the agency anymore.
Right.
We're talking about two nuclear superpowers with complex economies and global interests.
Right.
But the core dynamic is still there.
Okay.
A rising power challenging an established one
Right.
with the potential for miscalculation and escalation.
Right.
That's very real.
So how do we avoid falling into the Thucydides trap here?
Right.
What can we learn from what Athens did wrong?
The first step is seeing the dangers
Okay.
and not thinking about the relationship as a zero-sum game.
Okay.
The idea that one country can only win if the other loses, that's a recipe for disaster. We need to find ways to compete responsibly while also looking for areas to cooperate,
Like what?
like climate change or global pandemics.
Okay, that sounds sensible,
Yeah,
but also really hard in the current political climate.
it is.
There's a lot of distrust and bad feeling between the U.S. and China, fueled by nationalism and a sense of past wrongs.
That's exactly why the Melian Dialogue is so relevant.
Okay.
It shows how fear, pride, and pursuing your own narrow interests
Right.
can blind you to the bigger picture,
Yeah.
leading to really bad consequences.
Right.
The challenge for leaders today is to rise above those basic urges, to show restraint and wisdom, and to look for solutions that benefit not just their own countries,
Right.
but the whole world.
It's a tall order,
It is.
but a vital one for our collective survival. So it seems like the Melian Dialogue paints kind of a bleak picture of international relations.
Right.
Is there any room for optimism? Or are we just stuck in these cycles of power struggle and conflict?
The Melian Dialogue isn't necessarily saying that we're doomed.
Okay.
Instead, I see it more as a really strong warning
Well,
and a call to action.
right.
Thucydides, by by so carefully recording all of this, he gives us a way to understand why states act the way they do and what the consequences are.
Okay.
He's not saying, that the world has to be ruled by force.
That's right.
He's showing us the challenges of working within a system where power often overrides ethics.
So knowledge is power then.
Yeah.
By understanding the Thucydides trap,
Right.
we might be able to avoid falling into it ourselves.
Right, exactly.
But it seems like we need more than just awareness. We need actual strategies to reduce these risks, especially in a world with nuclear weapons and global interconnectedness.
Absolutely. And while the Melian Dialogue doesn't give us any easy answers, it does point to some principles that can help us.
Okay.
The Athenians, in their arrogance, thought military strength alone would keep them safe and prosperous.
Okay.
They didn't get the importance of diplomacy,
Right.
the value of building trust, and they didn't see the potential for unintended consequences.
Right.
These are lessons that modern leaders really need to learn.
So building trust and encouraging communication are key to breaking out of this cycle of fear and aggression.
Right.
But how do we do that in a world where national interests often clash? And states naturally put their own security first.
It's tough, but it's not impossible.
Okay.
International institutions like the UN can help with dialogue and mediating disputes.
Right.
Economic interdependence can also give reasons to cooperate because countries realize that their well-being is connected.
Right.
And maybe most importantly, we need a change in mindset. We need to recognize that global problems like climate change and pandemics need everyone to work together, not just focus on themselves.
It's a call for a smarter kind of realpolitik.
Yeah.
One that sees the limits of force.
Right.
And understands that our world is interconnected.
Right.
The Melian Dialogue, by showing us how the Athenian approach failed, kind of hints at a way towards a more stable and just international order.
Exactly. The tragedy of Melos is a powerful reminder that going after power without thinking about ethics leads to instability and suffering.
Right.
The challenge for us now is to learn from those past mistakes and create a future where diplomacy, cooperation, and shared values guide our actions.
This deep dive has been a really thought-provoking journey.
It has.
We've looked at the brutality of ancient war, the enduring problems of power and morality, and the unsettling parallels between the Peloponnesian War and the challenges we face today.
The Melian Dialogue, even though it comes from a specific moment in history, still speaks to us across the centuries. It forces us to face some uncomfortable truths about human nature, the desire for power, and how fragile peace is.
And it reminds us that history isn't just a bunch of dates and battles, but a living conversation that can help us understand the present and shape the future. If we really listen, we might find the wisdom we need to navigate our own times and avoid the tragic mistakes of the past.
Indeed. The Melian Dialogue is a strong reminder that the choices we make, both individually and together, have consequences that can echo through time. Let's hope that future leaders learn from Thucydides and try to build a world where might doesn't make right. And where diplomacy and cooperation win out over force.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the Melian Dialogue. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep looking to the past for wisdom to guide us through the complexities of our present.